Imagine a dense, emerald green canopy in the foothills of the Himalayas, roughly 8,000 years ago. It is the height of the monsoon season, and the air is so thick with humidity you can almost taste the damp earth and rotting vegetation. In this specific slice of the Neolithic era, a hunter-gatherer moves silently through the bamboo thickets, eyes scanning the forest floor. He isn't looking for a tiger or a deer. He is looking for a very specific prize hidden in the undergrowth, the nest of a red jungle fowl. This bird, a small, skittish ancestor of the modern chicken, has just laid a small clutch of 4 or 5 beige eggs. To this hunter, those eggs are a miracle of compact nutrition, a goldmine of fats and proteins that are far easier to catch than a pheasant. But as he reaches for them, he is participating in the opening chapter of a cold case that has lasted millennia. Why, out of all the thousands of egg-laying species on this planet, did his descendants decide that this one specific bird would become the world's universal breakfast provider? Why are you, right now, almost certainly capable of finding a chicken egg in your fridge, but would have to search a specialty map to find a single egg from a turkey, a duck, or an emu? If this were just a matter of what was available, our plates would look very different. The mystery isn't just about why we eat chicken eggs, but why we've effectively blacklisted almost every other option. We've turned the chicken into a global biological machine, while the eggs of nearly every other creature, from the massive ostrich to the tiny, speckled quail, have been relegated to the status of expensive novelties or forgotten relics of the past. To solve this, we have to treat the chicken egg's dominance not as an inevitability, but as a riddle. We need to look at the clues hidden in biology, the red herrings of the culinary world, and the cold, hard math of industrial economics. It is a mystery that takes us from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the high-tech laboratories of the 21st century, all to answer one question: what makes the chicken egg the chosen one? But if we're going to solve this mystery, we have to start by ruling out the most obvious suspects. Was it simply a matter of flavor? The first false lead in our investigation is the idea that chicken eggs simply taste better than everything else. We tend to assume that because the chicken egg is the neutral flavor we're used to, everything else must be weird, gamey, or unpalatable. But if you talk to any high-end chef or historical food researcher, they'll tell you that this is a complete myth. In fact, in many ways, the chicken egg is the most boring option on the menu. Take the duck egg, for instance. If you were to crack one open next to a chicken egg, you'd immediately notice the difference. The yolk is significantly larger in proportion to the white, and it's packed with a much higher concentration of fats and lecithin. This makes duck eggs incredibly rich, almost like a custard in egg form. In the 19th century, duck eggs were often preferred for baking because that extra fat content creates a loftier, richer sponge cake than a chicken egg ever could. If flavor and culinary performance were the primary drivers of our food system, the duck would be a much stronger contender for the throne. So, if the duck egg is arguably better for cooking, why isn't it the standard? Perhaps the answer lies with the larger birds. Consider the ostrich. A single ostrich egg is the equivalent of about 24 chicken eggs. It's a massive, 2-pound orb of nutrition that could feed a whole family. Historically, humans have been eating them for at least 60,000 years. Archaeologists have found ostrich eggshells used as water canteens in the Deep Kloof rock shelter in South Africa. The flavor is often described as slightly sweeter and more intense than a chicken egg, but fundamentally very similar. If you wanted to optimize for most food per shell, the ostrich is the clear winner. Yet, you don't see ostrich omelets at the local diner. The same goes for the emu, whose dark green, jewel-like eggs have a texture so creamy it's been compared to brie cheese. Even the eggs of reptiles, which sound unappealing to many modern Western palates, have a long history of being prized for their taste. Crocodile eggs, for example, are a staple in parts of Australia and Southeast Asia. They have a higher yolk-to-white ratio than bird eggs and a flavor that is described as extra creamy, with a slight hint of the swamp, but nothing that a little seasoning couldn't fix. If humans were purely seeking the most delicious or the most impressive egg, we would have domesticated the ostrich or the duck as our primary source ages ago. The taste argument doesn't hold up under scrutiny because, in reality, we've spent centuries breeding the flavor out of chicken eggs to make them as consistent and inoffensive as possible. We didn't choose the chicken egg because it was the most delicious. We chose it despite the fact that other eggs offered more complex flavors. But if the flavor wasn't the barrier that kept other eggs off our tables, could there be a darker, more dangerous reason hidden inside those other shells? This leads us to our second false lead, the safety and health argument. It's easy to imagine that we don't eat other eggs because they might be toxic or carry exotic diseases. After all, we're taught from a young age to be terrified of salmonella in chicken eggs, so surely a wild egg from a turtle or a turkey must be twice as dangerous. But the science actually suggests the opposite. Most bird eggs are remarkably safe to eat, provided the bird itself is healthy. In fact, chicken eggs are actually some of the most porous eggs in the avian world. The shell of a chicken egg is covered in thousands of microscopic pores that allow the developing embryo to breathe, but these pores also act as a gateway for bacteria like Salmonella enteritidis to enter the egg. Contrast this with the duck egg. Duck eggs have a much thicker, waxier outer coating called a cuticle, and the shell itself is denser. This makes them significantly more resistant to bacterial penetration than chicken eggs. In terms of shelf life and natural protection, the duck egg is actually the superior piece of biological packaging. And what about nutrition? If you look at a study published in the Journal of Food Composition and Analysis, you'll find that quail eggs actually contain more protein, more vitamin B12, and more iron per gram than chicken eggs. They are tiny nutritional powerhouses. Even the ostrich egg, despite its size, has a nutritional profile that is almost identical to a chicken egg in terms of protein-to-fat ratios. There is no poison in a turkey egg. There is no hidden toxin in a goose egg. In fact, turkey eggs were a common food source for Native American populations and early European settlers. They are perfectly edible and, by most accounts, quite tasty. The reason we stopped eating them wasn't because people were dropping dead from turkey egg-induced illnesses. Even the eggs of sea turtles, which are now heavily protected for conservation reasons, were once eaten by the thousands in coastal communities with no ill effects on human health. We didn't move away from these eggs because they were bad for us. We moved away from them because of a much more subtle, biological glitch that made them impossible to turn into a global industry. If it's not taste and it's not safety, then we have to look deeper into the biological machinery of the birds themselves. Is there something hidden in the way a chicken functions that makes it a freak of nature compared to its cousins? This is where we find our first real clue, the mystery of the indeterminate layer. In the world of ornithology, birds are generally divided into two groups, determinate and indeterminate layers. A determinate layer is a bird that has a fixed number of eggs it can produce in a single clutch. If a crow or a pigeon lays 4 eggs and you take one away, the bird doesn't care. It has finished its biological task for the season, and it will simply sit on the remaining 3. You cannot trick a determinate layer into giving you more food. If we had tried to build an industry around pigeons, the global egg supply would vanish in a week because the birds would simply stop producing once their count was reached. The chicken, however, is an indeterminate layer, and it is a particularly obsessive one. The red jungle fowl evolved in an environment where nest predation was incredibly high. To survive, it developed a biological reset button. If an egg is removed from the nest, the chicken's endocrine system registers the loss and immediately triggers the production of another egg to replace it. This is a biological loophole that humans learned to exploit thousands of years ago. By constantly stealing the egg, we keep the chicken in a permanent state of trying to finish a clutch that will never be completed. But here is the real kicker. While some other birds like ducks and turkeys are also indeterminate layers, the chicken is the most efficient at it. A wild turkey might be tricked into laying a few extra eggs, but it still has a very rigid breeding season dictated by the length of the day. They only lay eggs in the spring. If you want eggs in November, you're out of luck. The chicken, through thousands of years of selective breeding and its own unique tropical ancestry, has a much looser internal clock. It doesn't need a specific season to lay, it just needs enough light and food. This biological quirk, the ability to be tricked into a year-round, daily laying cycle, is the first major piece of evidence in our case. It gave the chicken a productivity score that no other bird could match. But even with this biological trick, there's a massive problem. To produce an egg every day, an animal needs a staggering amount of energy. If you have a bird that weighs 20 pounds, like a turkey, it's going to eat you out of house and home just to produce one egg. If the math of the energy in versus energy out doesn't work, the whole mystery falls apart. Is it possible that the chicken didn't win because it was the best, but because it was the cheapest to run? This brings us to our second real clue, the economics of the feed conversion ratio. In the investigation of why certain foods become staples, you always follow the money, or in this case, the grain. To understand why we don't eat turkey eggs, you have to look at the cost of production. A turkey is a large, heavy bird. It takes a significant amount of food just to keep that turkey alive and warm before it even thinks about producing an egg. Because turkeys lay fewer eggs and take longer to reach maturity, the cost of a single turkey egg is estimated to be about 10 times the cost of a chicken egg. In the mid-1800s, there was a period in America and England known as hen fever. It was a literal craze where people became obsessed with breeding the perfect poultry. During this time, people experimented with everything: geese, ducks, turkeys, and exotic chickens from China. But as the Industrial Revolution began to turn farming into a science, the data started coming in. The chicken was the ultimate middle manager of the bird world. It was small enough that it didn't require massive amounts of feed, but large enough that its eggs were a substantial meal. A duck, by comparison, is a messy eater. Ducks require water to forage, and they tend to waste more feed by trampling it into the mud. They are also much harder to keep in the high-density environments that modern food systems require. If you try to put 50,000 ducks in a barn, you end up with a soggy, unhygienic disaster. But chickens? Chickens are remarkably dry birds. They have a social structure that allows them to live in closer quarters without the same level of environmental chaos. There was a specific study conducted in the early 20th century as agriculture was becoming industrialized that looked at the caloric return of various animals. The chicken was off the charts. It could convert low-quality scrap grain into high-quality protein faster and more efficiently than almost any other creature on Earth. The turkey egg failed not because it wasn't good, but because the turkey was an expensive employee that only worked 3 months a year. The chicken was the worker who never took a vacation and lived on pennies. But even if an animal is cheap to feed and lays eggs year-round, there is one final hurdle it must clear to dominate the globe. That egg has to survive the journey from the farm to your kitchen. If an egg is too fragile or too weirdly shaped, it can't become a global commodity. Could the secret to the chicken's success be hidden in the physical structure of the shell itself? Our third real clue is the industrial geometry of the egg. This is a part of the mystery that most people never consider. Think about the last time you bought eggs. They came in a very specific, molded cardboard or plastic carton. That carton is the result of over a century of engineering, specifically designed around the dimensions of a large chicken egg. In 1911, a man named Ray Milton Emery invented the egg carton to settle a dispute between a local farmer and a hotel owner who kept receiving broken eggs. Emery's design was a stroke of genius, but it was a design that only worked for one specific shape. If we wanted to switch to duck eggs tomorrow, we would have to replace every single egg handling machine, every carton, every refrigerator shelf spacing, and every automated sorting belt in the world. Duck eggs are slightly larger and have a more pointed end. They don't fit in standard chicken egg cartons. If you put a duck egg in a chicken egg crate, it will likely crack or roll around. Ostrich eggs are even worse. They are so large and heavy that they require specialized padding and can't be handled by any existing industrial infrastructure. But there's more to it than just size. The shell of a chicken egg is a masterpiece of just enough engineering. It is strong enough to resist the weight of a sitting hen and the rigors of shipping, but fragile enough that a human, or a weak chick, can break it with ease. Compare this to the shell of an emu or an ostrich egg, which can be so thick you sometimes need a literal handsaw or a drill to get inside. In a fast-paced culinary world, an egg that takes 5 minutes to open is a failure. Furthermore, Chicken eggs have a very specific porosity that allows them to be washed and coated in a thin layer of mineral oil in the US or left unwashed in Europe to maintain shelf stability. Many other eggs, like those of certain waterfowl, have a much higher oil content on the shell, which can actually cause them to go rancid or pick up off flavors from the environment much faster. The chicken egg was the Goldilocks of packaging, not too hard, not too soft, and perfectly sized for the machinery of the 20th century. So, after looking at the false leads and the clues, we've arrived at the final stage of our investigation. The case is almost closed, but we need to look at the verdict. Is the chicken's dominance a sign of its biological superiority, or is it a sign of something much more calculated? The verdict of our investigation is this. The reason we don't eat other animal eggs is not because those eggs are inferior. It is because the chicken is the only bird that hacked the human economic system. It wasn't a single factor that won the war. It was a perfect storm of biological accidents that humans then spent 8,000 years amplifying through selective breeding. The chicken's status as an indeterminate layer gave us the quantity. Its tropical ancestry gave us the year-round consistency. Its small body size gave us the economic efficiency. And its standardized shell gave us the industrial compatibility. We didn't just choose the chicken, we built the modern chicken. We took a wild bird from the bamboo forests that laid maybe 15 eggs a year and we transformed it into a biological factory that can lay over 300. No other bird had that same starting point. If we had tried to do this with the turkey, we would have been fighting against millions of years of seasonal evolution that is much harder to break. If we had tried it with the duck, we would have been fighting against the logistical nightmare of a wet bird. We chose the path of least resistance. But there is a cost to this victory that we rarely talk about. Because we have concentrated our entire global food system on one single species, we have created a monoculture of the egg. If a specific strain of avian flu hits the global chicken population, as it has several times in the last few decades, the entire egg market collapses. We have no plan B. We've forgotten how to eat the rich, fatty duck eggs that our ancestors prized. We've lost the tradition of the turkey egg and the seasonal treat of the goose egg. We have traded diversity for efficiency, and in doing so, we've narrowed the human experience of food down to a single, white-shelled orb. The mystery of why we don't eat other eggs is ultimately a story about how humans prefer predictable over interesting. We would rather have 1,000,000 identical, slightly bland eggs that cost 15 cents each than 1,000 incredible, rich, and varied eggs that cost $1 each. The chicken egg didn't win because it was the best egg on the planet. It won because it was the most obedient egg. It was the only bird that was willing to work the graveyard shift 365 days a year for the lowest possible wage. And so, we return to the hunter in the jungle 8,000 years ago. He didn't know that by taking those 4 small eggs, he was starting an industrial machine that would eventually produce over 80 million tons of eggs per year. He just knew he was hungry. But his find changed the course of human history. It led to a world where egg means chicken, and everything else is just a footnote in a biology textbook. But as we look at the state of our modern food system, we have to ask ourselves one final question. We solved the mystery of how we got here. But is this where we want to stay? Now that the case is closed and the evidence is laid out, the reality of your breakfast looks a bit different, doesn't it? We like to think we're the masters of nature, choosing the very best of what the earth has to offer, but the truth is that your diet has been narrowcasted by a series of biological accidents and Victorian-era economic spreadsheet decisions. You don't eat chicken eggs because they are the pinnacle of flavor or the height of nutrition. You eat them because they were the easiest to turn into a commodity. Every time you crack one open, you're not just making a meal, you're participating in an 8,000-year-old monopoly. You are eating the winning egg of history, and the thousands of other flavors, textures, and nutrients that other eggs offer are effectively invisible to you. You've been told that this is just what an egg is, but now you know the truth. You're not choosing your food's ancestors chose you. And frankly, until you've tasted a duck egg sponge cake or a rich, creamy emu yolk, you're just a passenger in the chicken's world. The mystery isn't why we don't eat other eggs. The mystery is why you're still okay with only having one. Go find a duck egg and see what you've been missing.